Welcome back to Slaughter Cheap. I'm your host, Matt Daly, and we are with Ben Theis, the owner of SKOL. We're on our second podcast with Ben. Ben, welcome back. The first podcast, we covered your background, your childhood, your time at Google, the formation of SKOL, and we pick up where we left off from the first podcast. I want to take a deeper dive into the wolves that you've had to navigate once you established SKOL. I want to get back into some of the more technical wolves that we're talking about that a lot of our small business startups deal with, and one is the cash flow wolf. You have demonstrated and explained your confidence and the path in which you formed SKOL and started SKOL. I think that the bridge that you built, whether you knew it or not, was a very strong bridge from being an employee to being an entrepreneur. But once you start the business, as soon as you form that LLC, form that entity, and hang that shingle, there is blood in the water, and wolves are circling. So one of them is what I call the cash flow wolf. So you're starting a new business. You got to pay rent. You got insurance, advertising, payroll. So how did you fund SKOL during the startup phase, and how did you manage the cash in the first couple of years so that you didn't run out?
I was in another blessed or unique kind of situation in that what was nice about mine is a couple things. One is when we start talking about some of the normal overhead type of stuff, or even if it's a service-based industry, it's usually going to be like you have equipment and then rent or kind of location. What's nice, obviously, with me being digital, less equipment cost. That was nice. And then when it came to rent, when I was starting out, co-working was just a brand new kind of thing. And so being able to have intuition and taking advantage of some new opportunities, really what I'm getting at was trying to identify better ROIs or how can you keep your costs essentially down. Like even certain things that we all start to do is you start doing your own bookkeeping, you start doing your own taxes. Those are some things actually like pretty quickly you need to identify when you actually should pay someone because the opportunity cost then outweighs the pure cost. Every business is also different, especially service and product-based companies. When it's a service-based company and you're starting out as a solopreneur or even just having a couple contract employees, that whole thing of the harder you work or the more you work, because time is really your resource. The flip side is if I have an e-commerce site, I could go to bed and it could obviously be doing it or a SaaS. Service-based kind of company. Now, again, there's pros and cons to that. I can pretty much, the more I push the pedal on the gas, the farther I can essentially go faster. Me really realizing that and utilizing that and coming out and almost having a plan of, okay, really grind here. It's going to be able to mitigate the risk on the financial side. Then you do have an opportunity cost or an activity cost. You're going to have to take some of those hours or work late into the night and do those types of things. That's what I did was identifying the normal type of expenses like rent, like equipment, and seeing how we can minimize those as much as possible. It's also a fun, unique opportunity because obviously now, yes, I can work longer and go further, but we're to a different spot though that I need 6 other people, 10 other people, 15 other people to help me get up there. When you're starting out that thing, I don't think that sometimes people always take advantage of that opportunity because you won't have that flexibility or almost even that control over your own success.
Just to summarize a few things, you covered a lot of good points, but let's reduce this down. You leveraged co-working, which a lot of people did, and your business was tailor-made for that. You had co-working offices, and they are slick. You got the shared conference room and paying for a lot of square footage for a fraction of the price. You have to share, and you got to use the calendar and the whole 9 yards. And there's a kind of a buzz there. You've got a whole bunch of other entrepreneurs, and you can network. And so that you check that box. The other point that I heard you making was that in the early phases, it dawned on you that clearly, on top of being a business owner, you are also a worker.
Yes.
So I call it the factory floor. Right. I'm growing my business just like you, and I've been hiring pretty rapidly here in the past few years. I just hired a chief operating officer, fantastic woman named Michelle, and I told Michelle, listen, you're going to be running the factory floor for me. You have to go in and out of the factory floor, but when you are first starting, you're the person sitting in front of that drill press. You're also the person up in the second story office with the window looking over the factory floor. You're the guy fixing things when it goes wrong.
The janitor cleaning up.
Yeah, you're the janitor, you're the PR guy. The one point I heard you making is that that we can communicate to the small business owners is do not be afraid in the early years to be the main output source for your business.
Yep.
If you're a landscaper, plan on spending a lot of time on the job site with a wheelbarrow, with the bobcat. That's hourly pay you don't have to pay to somebody else. Now,
Yep.
eventually, if you want to grow, you have to start pulling yourself out of there. And so that's the next thing we want to talk about is in these startup wolves is going after quality employees, always a challenge, retaining them, but also training and delegating. One of the problems I see across many of my clients, the ones that seem to be crimped and have a hard time growing, is the owners have a hard time delegating. They have a very high standard of quality. They maintain close contacts with their clients or their customers all the time. They don't even want their workers talking to the customers. And I tell these people that, listen, you have an excellent quality rating, customer satisfaction, you got a great brand, but you're just never going to grow because you're just involved in everything.
Yep.
And explain to the listeners how you overcame that.
Yeah.
Because clearly, just in my interaction with your staff, you've delegated wonderfully. They know what they're doing.
Yeah.
They don't need Ben on these calls.
It's hard. And honestly, it's probably the hardest thing that I've had to do. And I think the one thing to realize, you touched on it there too, is you have a choice, because you can spin all the plates and you can have a nice little kind of business there and you can, again, make that for yourself. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a matter of what you want. Instead of me just putting the, again, foot on the gas pedal and just moving forward, I have to have maybe 3 people, 2 people, 4, 6, whatever it might be, all having to do that. You just putting your foot on the gas doesn't now move the car. You have to now have other people doing it. I think that's just like the hardest thing to realize. We all have high expectations. We obviously are very high skilled set. We're risk takers. I think the biggest thing that I realized, though, was that there is a skill set to lead, which everyone talks about, but there's also a skill set to follow. Not many people necessarily realize that too. There is a skill set to follow. And really what we're talking about is if everyone was like me, it wouldn't be there. And if everyone was like the other side, it wouldn't get in there. It's finding the right people in those blends to be able to do that and having the confidence without the arrogance.
That's a point. We have to make that point. I have it in my own organization. I've had accountants still work for me. We're phenomenal accountants. And my clients love them. And I've sat down with them, a number of them, and said, listen, if you're interested, I'd love to turn you into a manager, give you 3, 4, 5 accountants to work underneath you. You can have your own little fiefdom right in my company. Your compensation will grow substantially. They don't want to do it. They love their job. They love accounting and bookkeeping and interacting with clients, but they do not want to manage anybody. They're more than happy to follow. And that's a great point. And so what you're really saying is, to take it one step further, is that when you're trying to grow a company and you're recruiting, right? Because once you have them on board, you can fire them, right? But that's called a recruiting error, right? You don't want to go down that road. But while you're recruiting and you're putting that job description together, you really got to sit back and you got to close your eyes and say, okay, what do I want? Who do I want this person to be in this position? I want them to be highly technical, phenomenal work ethic. But I want them to be a follower. And the point that you're making, and this is very interesting, I haven't put much thought into this, but what you're really saying is, you know what? It's okay to be a follower. It doesn't mean that you're less of a person or less. It's just, it's where you're meant to be. Yeah, good. Very good. I love that. We've covered the cash flow. I think the key points: leverage common resources where they're available. The co-working one is the most obvious one, but there's other ones out there. I tell some of my clients, they ask me, should I have everything in-house? Should I have all my workers be W-2? And I always say, for me, it was always having a nice mix of W-2 and contractors. Because if for some reason half of your employees quit, right? The nice thing about having that contractor base is that you can ramp that up pretty quick. You can call that contractor up and say, listen, I have a ton of business for you. We got to sit down. And if they have the bandwidth, they can take it on. So I love what you talked about with these just few kind of startup wolves that we focused in on. Let's talk about growth. My view of your company is, I call it intelligent growth. I think it's been very measured. You haven't tried to grow too fast, which absolutely can be fatal and can flip you upside down and expose you to the wolves, right? But let's talk about not just going out and finding those employees, but retaining them.
Yeah.
Employee retention. It's probably the number one issue that I have on top of cash flow with my clients.
You don't always realize the expense that it can be like when you lose an employee, because it's not just rehiring someone, because you're just going to hire someone at the face value, the same amount. You're paying someone $60K, you're going to hire most likely someone again $60K.
Yep.
The opportunity cost, the activity cost, the training cost, the tribal knowledge cost,
Yes.
you really start to go, shoot, dang, it really hurts, because it's
Yes.
not just a dollar amount. The word culture gets thrown around. And sometimes I think it's been thrown around so much that sometimes people have lost the meaning. My thing is, it's treating people right and giving them a purpose of why they should be there and what they want to do. Respect and purpose.
Yep.
Those are really the two things. That's what we've done here at SKOL. And I just feel like most people are good people. It should almost come naturally. Sometimes if you're having a lot of culture issues, or people are having to tell you need to change this, you might want to look at yourself, because with all due respect, how I treat them, it's authentic, it's real, because almost all of us are very good people. So it's authentically just doing that. And of course, you can set up some structures and stuff like that, but it's probably one of the proudest things that I've done at SKOL. We were actually just talking about it today in a team meeting. We have a question of the week, and someone was asking about it, but it was talking about some of the differentiating factors with SKOL, and the team had never actually done this, let alone it happened today. Someone asked a question, and the whole team went around and started talking about what they thought differentiating factors or some of the things that they liked about SKOL.
Wow.
I heard a lot of the team. It's fun to be here. You know what I mean? And it goes back to that culture thing.
Yeah.
Of course, we've lost people.
Yeah.
What's great is that almost every single person that we've lost, it's usually been because we've had a couple that have for family issues, or especially during this COVID, is someone just comes in with a bag, just sits it on the table, a bag of money, and I just can't compete. But also, it's super gratifying that I've had to tell employees, like, no, you have to go take that. That is a great opportunity. I appreciate that it's hurting you, but I want what's best for you. And honestly, that is too good of an opportunity. Seeing those kind of opportunities is super gratifying, because it makes people stop, because they feel the respect and they feel the purpose that's here. And I really think that's what it comes down to with retention.
Yeah. So what you've touched on is what we call the qualitative. So it's not necessarily the employee benefits and the bonuses and all that. And we don't really have to get into that. But I think that you're absolutely correct. It's something that I've always tried to espouse as a Christian. It's the golden rule.
Yep.
When you walk through those doors, you look around and say, all right, how do I want to be treated? How do I want these people to be treated? And it's pretty simple. Nobody likes to be talked down to or made fun of or snapped at. The one thing you learn as a business owner, and the one thing I see amongst my client base, is you can learn a lot about the character of a person when they're under a lot of stress. I'm not here to judge anybody. I've had my bad days just
Likewise.
like everybody else. I look back on my life or my business career, and I think some of the most regrettable moments that I've ever had is when I have been disrespectful to people, even if they theoretically deserved it.
Yep.
Somebody's just in your face, rude, whatever. And I look back and say, yeah, I can see why I guess I snapped at that person. But the truth of it is, if I had to do it over, I wouldn't.
Yep.
In spite of the way they behave towards me. And one thing you realize with your employees is that they're watching your every move.
Mm-hmm.
You're the king. You're walking in here. I know you don't want them to think that way. You want them to just, you're part of the team. But the reality is they respect you. They want to learn from you. But clearly, if you start displaying bad behavior, they're going to pick up on that immediately, right? And my guess would be is if I brought your employees in here one by one and I just said, listen, it's a rated opinion of Ben, I want to hear it. And I just would be willing to bet my life that with a few minor exceptions, I think
no one's perfect.
I think that they would be singing your praises, Ben. The other thing about employees is that they can sniff out BS pretty quick if you're not being honest with them.
I think that's a big thing. It goes to authenticity. You know what I mean?
Right. You can act like you care about them, but a man is judged by his actions, not his words.
And what you get at too, which I talk about this with clients, one mistake that I see a lot of small business owners make, especially industry professionals, is I don't think they realize how smart a consumer and employee is.
Yeah.
Yes, you might be smarter or whatever, but sometimes unintentionally talking down. The client was the one I always see. I see this all the time where some clients do this to their clients. You don't think that the client is smart enough to get it. Like they need you or whatever. It's time out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's not that they can't. It's just that their life, their job, their whatever desire could be enhanced by going with you. Same thing with employees. Employees are never going to care necessarily, nor should as much as I in the business. They may not work as hard.
Yeah.
And again, I don't mean that as a negative,
Yeah.
but it is a truth that a lot of small business owners have to kind of realize, because
Correct.
I get the same standards, and I've actually sometimes had it be detrimental, where I've had to step back and had to talk to people because, for instance, I don't necessarily expect them to work for minutes to me 7 days a week, or
Yeah.
sometimes I'll message the team on Slack at 2 a.m. in the morning because my mind's just going.
Yeah.
But I've had to be careful and had to make sure that I talk to them, because if you do that too much, it almost becomes weaponized.
Yeah.
And it's almost, I can't compete with that.
No.
That must be Ben's standards.
Correct.
So I can't do that. As a team, I always think about it too. If you're trying to get to 100%, one person might be 50%, another one's 10, 20 there, but it all equals 100. It has to be equitable. However you have that set up, obviously someone can't be dragging along in there.
Yeah.
But I think your customers / clients and your employees are smarter than I think than some people give them credit for.
Yeah.
Plus, it's also just realizing that you talk about it, your every move. We did it in evaluation today, earlier this year. And one thing that I was knocked on was one of our core values is work hard, play hard. Some people can take that differently. I definitely work hard and I also play hard. I love to travel and I do some really cool, fun stuff, and I'm blessed to be able to do that. But the reason I got knocked is because when we did team activities, a lot of times I was skipping those because I had work to do. But in my mind, I'm thinking like, I'm actually trying to do work that you guys don't get behind or that we as a company doesn't.
Got it.
But realizing that I had several people, and I'm glad they said it,
message.
but they said though that it just made them feel like they weren't important enough for me to set that down and to go. That just happened this year. And so you talk about always growing. It literally was something that I've really worked on this year, going, okay, so those things are also very important. So again, being authentic, listening, and doing that. So that was a unique one for me this year.
And that particular point right there is what I call perception is reality at times.
Yep.
And it's not always reality, but it's almost the inverse, where you say there's reality and then there's how people perceive it. But in this particular instance, as the business owner, perception is reality.
Yep.
If they perceive that you not going to that event, if they perceive that as a slight, well, man, he's got more important things to do.
Yeah.
He's not going to play cornhole with us or paintball or whatever, skydiving.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the work is less important than you going there. Why? Because they want to spend time with you.
Yeah.
They want to interact with you in an area that's other than doing work.
Yep.
What's this guy? If I bump into him hard, how's he going to react if we're playing a game, right?
It's a team. So it was a great reminder this year too. It's not all about what I want. Even though I'm saying I would be working, and you can technically say that that's getting the business going, but we're a team. And so just one aspect of that is different. A football team, linemen are different than running backs there. You can't just keep running the ball there. You got to mix it up or whatever. And it was a good realization that, okay, yeah, you do have to do that and listen and stuff like that.
So I want to jump over to one last wolf, if you will, in the growth wolf. And then we got a couple other critical topics we got to cover before we wrap this up. I call this the chaos wolf. Okay. And when you're growing as your company, I always say it's a double-edged sword, right? What does a double-edged sword mean? Double-edged sword is great because you can cut with both sides. It's a great weapon, but you can also cut yourself. That's the danger of a double-edged sword. The edge that can cut you in this particular instance when you're growing fast is what I call the chaos wolf. And what I mean by that is, as the business owner, ultimately everything goes through you. Every change to a website, every new website, every social media campaign, whether one of your employees did it or not, ultimately it's you. Correct. You own it. There's just the volume of things, that much higher volume of work product that you are responsible for. There's more vendors, there's more clients, there's more employees, right? And for our business, small business sheep that are listening, that are considering starting a business or in the infant stages, you need to understand that sometimes success can be your worst enemy. You're going to have that chaos. You're going to get pulled in 17 different directions. There is a way to tame that chaos wolf. And people use many different techniques. How have you tamed it?
I think it's a great point. Everyone always jokes about it, that I thrive or I live in chaos. I feel like I'm a little pre-wired to be able to do it. But like you say, everybody has their different styles and whatnot. And for me, it's staying organized and almost just having a plan, being able to stay structured I'd say 90% of issues come down from communication. And that's the biggest thing is when you get into this chaos, the easiest thing to lose sometimes is communication because you're just focused a lot of times on yourself and everything like that. So I always say is, what can you do to make sure that communication doesn't falter? Because that's just going to compound issues even further because 90% of issues are caused by communication issues.
And so how do you solve that communication issue? Obviously, in your industry, you got to be leveraging technology to solve it.
Correct.
So give our listeners a little bit of insight in how you solve that.
Yeah. For instance, my standards of communication have really increased. I have a very short fuse, or I'm sure for lack of a better term, but I really expect a lot of communication because it's so easy to communicate these days. You can call, you can email, you can text, you can voice message, you can now Zoom, you can meet in person. And so my point is really look at all of the communication styles that you have. And how do we outline it? It's realizing that you can really communicate anything at any time. Now, of course, have some boundaries or whatever, but I have a really hard time when people cause issues because I didn't have time for that or I did this. And I'm like, okay, with all due respect, you can literally be messaging someone in the bathroom, like everybody. I'm just saying, like
underwater in a submersible sub. You
can be doing that kind of stuff, and so there's always down points to that. Now you have to be able to balance it because I know that people
can get too much communication,
and that's where sometimes
that's a chaos.
I'll actually tell you, chaos wolf. There is one of my greatest strengths has been communication, responding right away, making sure everyone knew. Okay, at the end of meetings, this is your to do, this is my to do. That's been great. But I was so on top of it one time. I had a client that I went into a movie. I watched a movie. And so I went in movie theater. I turned my phone on Do Not Disturb. I came out of it. I had, I think it was 3 text messages, 3 voicemails, and 6 missed calls from them because I didn't respond soon enough that they thought something was wrong with me. And they thought something was because I went to a 2.5 hour long movie. So I do tell people that you do have to be careful because then when you set that expectation, it's there.
Correct.
But again, it goes back down to though, staying organized. Again, like for me, I create lists, I create a to-do list, I tackle those, I do that. For me, it's keeping your emails and my text messages gone through, making sure that they aren't missed, having a folder system and stuff like that. I have to teach my team here too. I get very frustrated when people are like, I didn't see that email. I didn't catch that. Okay, again, we have technology now and notifications and everything. You got to utilize them and be able to do it. So I really do think a lot of it can be self-induced or self-helped. Just be careful because you can go the other way and then you set expectations there and then people think you're died because you went to a movie.
Very interesting. Everything you're saying is a fine line. Like you say, if you have a phone on you, there's just no excuse. Whatever cloud platform you might be on and the messaging system in there. But like you said, it's a fine line. You also don't want to promote a situation where your employees are sending you 17 texts an hour.
Right. You're right. So effective communication is a very good way too.
Effective and efficient. Effective means that you're communicating concisely, you're getting the message across quickly, but also efficient. Listen, I don't need to know that you turned your computer on. Okay.
Correct.
That's good for you. That helps you get your job done, but I don't need to know that. If the work is done and you're about to send it to me, great. I want to hear that. Why? Because the client wants to know when it's going to be done, right?
Another thing too that I would say for small business owners and stuff like that, I think you do have to have that. And I think it comes a lot of times naturally for us and we sometimes want it, but I think you have to realize that your expectation of communication is elevated the higher up you go. Meaning I have worked with some small businesses or as they go, okay, I'm going to make sure my phone's off. I'm not going to take a call outside of 9 to 5, again, this or that. Maybe you can make that work. But the realistic thing in today's world, running a business, starting a business, you're going to have to grind. That's just, in my opinion, not going to work. And sometimes it's understanding that from generations, just from different personalities. And it doesn't matter if you're an introvert, extrovert, you're old or young, black or white. There are things that transcend all of those. And that's what I'm saying. If you're going to go down this path and you want to have a successful business there, of course you can set limits. And that's one thing I really struggled with early on. I told you about the movie theater one. I'm not going to lie. I think this is where I really realized that beyond that one kind of being funny is when I had a client that knew that I was at my brother's funeral, actually contacting me. That's on that person, I will admit. But I really realized, okay, the idea that you think that you could do that now is actually partly on me. That's super inappropriate. I'm just saying it's both sides. And so I think it's such a unique kind of dynamic. I really focus on communication, but like you said, being effective and efficient communication, then understanding the expectations that you are setting, and then also the expectations that are set upon you because there is so much technology available, plus just knowing that the higher up you go, there is some more expectation for communication.
Yeah, I like to say there's a language called business speak. There really is. And sometimes I speak it too often to my employees. I'm just so efficient and concise in what I say, and maybe I got to humanize myself a little bit. But the truth of it is, it's a little bit of a military operation when you're running a business, and you can't be just skidding off into anecdotes or what you had for breakfast this morning. I'm sure it was great. All right, Ben, this second part of the Ben Theis SKOL podcast series is coming to a close here, and I want to thank you for the ground we've covered, the startup wolves, the growth wolves, and of course, the infamous chaos wolf. But we've run out of time here for this second podcast, and I think it definitely warrants at least one more. Definitely want to hear Ben's take on AI and how it's impacted your business and potentially the businesses of the listeners, of all the sheep that are tuning in. We want to talk about the hype wolves, and there's a rumor out there about $1 billion offer that I think we might have to dig into. But once again, thank you very much, Ben. We're going to close this podcast out, and we look forward to seeing you next time.